So as an introduction, my great aunt Sue Schatz McDonald began life on the Prairie, 20 miles east of the Missouri River in North Dakota on a farm. She was the sixth of 9 children of Christina Schlickenmeyer Foley Schatz. Before I present Aunt Susie's memories of her early life on the Prairie, I'm going to show an overview of the area in North Dakota where they settled and some of the locations mentioned in my aunt's stories. So I have up Google Earth. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but you can put in pins, and so I've done that, showing the area they lived in. So this is where she originally settled with her first husband and her second husband, and then she retired to McCluskey. Bismarck is down in this area. Turtle Lake was where my aunt's grandfather retired to from the farm. His farm was down south of there. Christina Schatz, my Aunt Susie's mother, and her second husband Heinrich lived on this farm. Their aunt and uncle, who were brother and sister of Christina's sister was Caroline, and Heinrich's brother was Carl. So they lived in adjacent homesteads. And then the school was up here, so that was about 1.5 miles from where they lived. So their whole story takes place in this pretty small location. Pickardville was on the rail line, McCluskey and Turtle Lake were all on the rail line. And then Alta Community Church and store was in the area here. When I say it's my great Aunt Sue. In 1901, Mom and her first husband, Albert Boley, came from Russia by ship to Ellis Island, New York. From New York, they took a train to South Dakota near Eureka. Mom told us how frightened she was looking out the train window, telephone poles speeding by, and she would flinch and scream to the amusement and laughter of the other seasoned travelers. From Eureka, South Dakota, they started out in a convoy of covered wagons about March 1902. Once they settled, they farmed for a couple years, and then Mr. Boley, her husband, died in 1904, leaving Mother with a young child and one on the way. Then in 1905, Mother married Henry Schatz and moved to a farm 10 miles south of Pickardville. He had sold his homestead to buy this existing farm and wooden frame house. Here I was born, also the rest of the children. Here is where my prairie life started in the year 1909. How lucky we were to have had this experience. Mother sold her Boley homestead and bought a home in McCluskey in 1930 when they retired from farming when my brothers Hank and Ed took over on the old farm. McCluskey was 13 miles north and east of the farm on the rail line. Now, I don't know German either, so I'm going to attempt what this says. Alle Roden und raus, Boys and Girls, work to do. Dad's morning greeting. The small cottage seemed to shake itself like a mother hen when we erupted like a batch of chickens to start the day. No work, no eat was his policy. No one dared stay abed after his clarion call. Not even hiding under the bed could save you from going out to pick potato bugs or manure the barn. We walked 1.5 miles to school, so cows had to be milked, calves and the animals fed, then breakfast and off to school before sunrise in the winter. This episode will be written about our prairie life as I recall it. My brothers and sisters, no doubt, would remember in their own way and would be totally different. One of my earliest memories is of sitting at church, which was held in the Stenix schoolhouse. Mom held baby brother Ben in her arms wrapped in a patchwork quilt, and Emmanuel and me sitting beside her. I recall bending my still soft-soled shoes back and forth, listening to a sermon in German. The very first church services were held at a neighbor's place across the creek about 3 miles from home. How dressed up and clean we were in our hand-me-downs and occasional new dress. Dad drove fast through the creek. Mud splashed on my blue-dotted white dress, which was a disaster to Mother, as the spot remained in spite of Ma's hurriedly cleaning it with spit. All the mothers in those days wiped faces clean with spit. No one knew germs could kill. Mother's aprons also served as nose wipers for the numerous offspring. Who could afford hankies except for nice, as we said? We also attended the Methodist services in our school in Edgemont Township. Sermons were in English and very fundamental, as were the Baptists. No dancing, no card playing, no smoking, nor drinking, etc. On Sunday, we weren't allowed to sew or do other work, only the necessary chores. Nevertheless, Sundays were wonderful events after long work 6 days a week on the farm. After services were over, neighbors were invited for noon dinner and visits, or went to their homes for wonderful feasts of German food, and always the delicious rich fruit custard kuchen for dessert. Once a month, when the preachers came, a cold meal was brought to church for an inside picnic. Then afternoon services were resumed, home for chores, then another evening at church. Many tired heads would nod till the loud voice of hell and damnation startled us out of our stolen nap, or a jab in the ribs to keep us awake. Winters we went by wagon or bobsled. One night on our way home by wagon we heard a plop, plop as the wagon bumped over rocks and dirt. Looking underneath, we found a stupid hen who had ridden all the way to church and back, none the worse for her miserable ride of 2 or more miles. How vast and big the sky at Prairie seemed, endless hills and roads to an endless earth. How small we felt in this harsh but beautiful land. One could see lights in the windows for miles, because the land was flat and mainly treeless. Wild fruit was picked near the Missouri River, which was a long 20 miles by horse and wagon. The fruit wasn't much, but it was better than none. Choke cherries, Juneberries, plums, and buffalo berries. Juneberries canned for desserts, other fruit as jelly and jams. It took a lot to feed 10 people. For winter, if crops were good, we stored about 100 bushels of spuds in the dugout. Also pumpkins, onions, cabbages, rutabagas, and 1 barrel of sauerkraut with whole apples in it. Also cabbage heads or leaves for halloupsi, a barrel of dilled watermelons, and delicious dilled cucumber pickles. Not knowing anything about botulism, Mom fried pork chops, etc., and put them in a crock with a layer of fat over them. Also, a crock of corned pork was stored there. Sausages, hams, etc., were smoked and hung in the granary, frozen solid as a block of ice. Yes, we lived high, even though we seldom had money. Cream was taken to stores and traded for sugar, flour, coffee, etc. Mother went through 100 pounds of flour every 2 weeks to feed us. What delicious bread and pastry. Bread tasted like San Francisco sourdough. Turning butter for 10 was a chore. Butchering time was a long, messy job. Neighbors helped one another, so each shared in some of the meat and sausage. How angry I used to get at Uncle Carl or Dad. Whoever mixed the sausages took a big blob of it and smeared it on our face if we forgot to watch them. It was called measuring on a sausage, and the length of the smear was the length of a special one made for us. It hurt our dignity, but a better tasting one I've never eaten. Metz's soup was made of the juices that all the meat and sausages were boiled in. It took us to midnight and the next day to render all the lard. Cracklings were stored for later use too. Dipped in salt, they were a good lunch with homemade bread. Nothing was wasted, even pigtails were cooked. Pig's feet were used for colats, or jellied pig's feet. Hogs were butchered, then scalded in boiling water in a huge wooden barrel, scraped clean of hair and hung on posts. After eviscerated internal organs soaked in cold water, Dad would clean the intestines for sausage casings. Occasionally I helped him. He blew air into them, squeezed out all the crud. Then I poured water into them. Intestines were soaked in salt brine, turned inside out, and then scraped clean. It took hours and hours of patient work. Even so, sometimes some sausage would taste of pig manure. Nothing was wasted. Stomach was filled with head cheese, larger intestines for liverwurst, thinner for sausage. Head cheese was made of meat, ears, head, skin of pig, ground, seasoned, boiled, and pressed. It may not sound so good, but was delicious. Home remedies for illness. For fever, Mother mixed clay and vinegar wrapped in cloth applied to head or feet. Burns, peeled raw potatoes were placed on them. Sore eyes were bathed in chamomile tea. Dad claimed eating lots of garlic cured illness. Man, how it stank. Mother used to eat it just for self-defense. He also burned resin on top of the stove to kill sickness in the house. He had never heard of germs, nor would he have believed in these invisible wee critters. We were given the sweat treatments for any illness, wrapped in all the feather quilts we had from head to foot, only a tiny air hole for breathing. A hot sad iron on feet, and man, you really sweat. How I hated these treatments, but seemed effective, or else we had to get well in self-defense. Cuts on bodies were treated with dirty spider webs to stop bleeding. Father had carbolic acid for his pigs, cows, and horses' wounds. We used it also. For colds, we also had to soak our feet in very hot salt water. Mother rubbed our chests with grease and later with a mustard salve, also onion poultice. Man, how she massaged us, till every part of our body hurt. Dad used to buy a bottle of so-called medicine called Alpine Prairie, made of herbs and alcohol. He took a snort of this every day. Man, this was a tonic I liked. Every so often I sneaked a snort too. Then he wondered why it disappeared so fast. Wonder, did my brothers and sisters steal snorts too? Dad had rheumatism very bad, so he had various gadgets to relieve the pain. The quacks must have seen him coming. One was a machine he called healing apparatus. It had batteries, tubes, very impressive-looking knobs, a copper tank filled with hot water for his feet. He turned this on and sad, hoping for the cure that never came. School. We milked cows, fed calves, cleaned barns, washed dishes, and did other chores before school, so we had to get up early. Then start for school before sun. It was sunset by the time we got home, hungry as bears. A big hot supper, then chores again, an evening of play or reading, and Dad would thump the walls, and that meant bedtime. No fooling around either. Anna Fisher was the first teacher at our new school building. As a birthday treat, Mother let me spend the day in school. What a fairyland it seemed, with its books, paper lanterns, drawings, and all the artwork of classes from primer to 8th grade pinned on walls and shelves. It was a happy day when I was old enough to go too and learn to read and write in English. German was spoke at home. Mother taught us all to read German, so we were lucky to be bilingual. At the time, though, we resented being called German or Russian, and just wanted to be Yankees too. Now I'm proud of our heritage. How lucky we all were that we liked to read. Teachers gave us books as prizes for having best grades and not missing school, nor being tardy. One year we received a book or two each. What joy that was! Mine were Grimm's fairy tales and Aesop's fables. I loved attending school even in winter. Mom would tie a shawl over my head, and my two poor older sisters almost had to drag me through the drifts. We took our lunch in tin syrup buckets. By noon, the food was frozen solid, but being hungry, we ate. It was a one-room school with a primer to the 8th grade. During noon hour, we played in the snow or built snow forts or played on the icy sloughs. We had many a fight at school. In winter, we'd snowball each other, sometimes hiding a rock in the snowball. If the snow was soft, you could make a really good solid ball. Sometimes the kids would make a bunch of them and let them freeze overnight. You could really get hurt by one of them. We also built snow forts and had mock battles, which often turned out to be serious. When the older boys were in school was a pretty tough place to be. When playing baseball, rocks were used as bases. Also hardballs. We never saw a softball. Rocky pastures were our baseball fields. Clearing the land. What a cold, miserable job, digging rocks and picking them. The older boys dug them up with the crowbar. Us 4-, 5-, and 6-year-olds put them on a stone boat, and they were hauled to a large pile. Sometimes we took the lunch out and stayed all day. Cold, wind-chilling bones, hand-chapped till they bled. Every year rocks had to be removed. It seemed as though the very devil drove them up from beneath the ground to torture us. One very cold fall day, Shorty and I sneaked off on hands and knees through the tall grass, then ran on home to warm our cold bodies. How scared we were of our father. We were sure he would thrash us, but to our surprise he never said a word. I'm still grateful to him for pretending he didn't see us sneak home. Skunks and wild animals built homes in the long rock piles. Even wild bees used them. Hearing the humming rock pile one time, Shorty and I were certain the pile was bewitched until we discovered the bees. We children took care of the acre or more of potatoes, weeding, hoeing, and picking potato bugs. A nasty job, but we had a lot of food in the winter. Spuds and meat were our daily diet. Some days bugs were so prolific we had to pick the stinking things 3 times a day. Each of us had a bucket to put the bugs in, then carried them home and drowned them in kerosene. In the fall, spuds were dug up and stored in the cellar before frost hit. It too was a long, slow, dirty job, as we used forks or shovels to dig each hill. How good, though, to know you had food for 10 people to last till spring. Stored in the cellar were big pumpkins, rutabagas, onions, huge cabbage heads, and carrots. In the cellar were also several tons of lignite coal from the Wilton mine. If you ran out of coal in winter, it was a long, cold drive of 15 miles in snow and blizzard to the mine. Men slept there overnight and came home the next day. You never knew if the men would come home alive or would freeze to death in drifting, swirling snow. So it was a welcome sight when they made it safely back. Pulling corn off stalks, throwing them into the wagon was quite a chore too for young children. Then haul a load home into the granary. In early years at husking time, husks were carefully saved for straw ticks or bedding. With a feathered tick over this, it made a comfortable bed. Husking corn was a rather pleasant job, Mom and we kids sitting around the bins looking for the prettiest Indian corn. When corn husks were scarce, Mother stuffed the ticks with clean, pleasant-smelling straw. Mother cooked huge kettles of dried shelled corn in winter. We ate it like candy, so I guess the pigs didn't get too much of it. It was really grown for them. Prairie fire, 1914-1916. Scared, we watched the fire rush across the prairie, driven by a constant wind. It devoured everything in its path. The tongue of flames leaped forward, belching gray-black, acrid smoke skyward, as though swallowing the very sun. Animals and birds, forgetting their fears of human, rushed ahead, hoping to escape the fire's destruction. "Oh, God, it's going to burn our home," was Mother's comment. Grabbing deeds and important papers, she rushed us down to the root cellar away from the house. We were like a bunch of frightened chickens huddled in the dark, dank cellar with its lizards, snakes, and frogs crawling on the walls. Then we heard voices calling, "Hurry, hurry, come out, all of you. We will backfire to save your farm." Kind neighbors had arrived at the risk of losing their own homes. Hurriedly, they used kerosene to build a fire grate around our farm. Gunny sacks and water were used to beat out flames, and a mother with her brood of 8 children were saved. Before Mom took us down to the cellar, I recall sitting on a box holding a pack of papers she had given me while my legs were shaking so much from fright. I could hardly hold the papers. It's 60-some years now, and this still lives in my memory, like a frightening bad movie. Had we stayed in the cellar, we would surely have burned or been asphyxiated. The roof of the cellar was burned and fell to the bottom. Other disasters were hordes of grasshoppers or other insects sweeping across, eating crops, gardens, grass, even the clothes on the line, then in desperate hunger chewed fence posts. Yet somehow we lived, worked, ate, laughed, and looked forward to the next spring and a new tomorrow. It is hard, heavy work for men, women, and children. How quickly we forgot droughts, blizzards, and fires, and were awed by this beauty of flowers, birds, animals, and ever-changing skies and rolling hills. New Year! Happy New Year! What a joyous time this was, too. No matter how cold the house or weather, we tried to be the first to yell, "I'm Blicket, I'm a Nacht," which I don't know exactly what it means, but it's like good night is all I could get. So it's probably dialect, and Joe, do you know what they would say? So happy night, Joe says. So thank you, Joe. The first one that said that received a nickel or dime from Dad. Chores and breakfast out of the way. Chores meaning milking cows, feeding calves, pigs, horses, etc. Cleaning barns, watering animals. Mother would fill a clean dish towel full of home-baked goods to bring to Aunt and Uncle a mile away. We walked and often met their children halfway to our place, also carrying goodies. Mom doled out her precious hoard of nuts, candy, etc. to each of us, too. Then the fun began. We played with hazelnuts on the floor as kids now play with marbles. Using a walnut for a shooter, we played keepsies. Whoever won was the lucky one. It took some skill on the uneven wood floor, so Hank won the most. Soon a knock on the door and a yell, "Happy New Year," and there was Charlie, the last cowboy in the area, throwing grain all over the kitchen, saying, "Give me 5 cents or I'll knock a hole in your house." It was an old German custom that whoever came to a home first and scattered grain on the stake received money. How I envied Charlie for being so bold. The rest of the day and evening after chores were spent with cousins, aunts, and neighbor children playing outdoors on the ice or snow, sledding, skating, if some were lucky enough to have skates. On very cold days, the big barns were our playgrounds too, or the haylofts, but not on our farm, as we had a rickety small barn for the poor cattle and horse. Tears streaming down our faces, we ran into the house saying, "The Easter rabbit is going to be killed by Fido. He's chasing him and we won't have Easter eggs Sunday." Dad called Fido back after our fright, and the jackrabbit went on his way, more scared, no doubt, than Shorty and I. Easter morn came, and there were these beautiful colored eggs, candy and peanuts in our green grass nest, along with a few real rabbit turds. Dad wanted to make sure we knew Bunny was still alive and laying eggs. On Pinkster Day, which Sunday before Easter, we decorated the gables of the house and the barn with green shrubs and strewed flower petals all over the white bedspreads on the house. Usually the early flowers were the lively blue stalks of Russian lilac. Buckbrush were our greens. On Good Friday, we feasted on slits, spooflies, and stewed fruit of prunes and apricots. How we gorged! This was a treat from the heavy meals of meat and potatoes. Slits spooflies are a sort of flat, square donut without the round hole, fried in deep fat. To this day, I continue this custom, even just for myself. Mom saved our eggs for weeks to die for Easter. If we were lucky, we got 60 or 100. When chickens didn't lay, we dyed whatever we could find. What fun this was. We all helped. Dyes were more beautiful than the present ones. Russians are noted for their artistic eggs. Strange, though, we dyed them. We never caught on that the ones in the nest weren't from old Bunny. Some years, whether being too cold and blustery or lack of money, we used beets, onion skins, coffee grounds, and red crepe paper to color them. Easter morn, chores finished, Mom gave us a bundle of eggs, candied kuchen to take to Aunt's family a mile away. What fun to walk the mile knowing we would receive surprises from her, too. The two families usually spend the holidays together, so no one was ever lonesome with such big families and relatives near. We had no toys except for things we could make, but we had a big prairie for our playground. Bones were saved for toy colts, and lucky the child who had the most bones in his dish. A bone from dead horses' legs and ankles when picked clean by coyotes and bleached by the sun were the parent horses. Many a mile was covered for these toys. Various other bones and corn cobs were used for the other farm animals. We made outlines of model farms with little rocks. Even in the yard at school, the girls would make houses using rocks to outline the rooms. The boys, as boys will do all over, tried their best to destroy the rooms, but we rebuilt them. We had many sloughs, now called potholes. And in the winter, what fun to skate on the frozen surfaces. We played crack the whip on the ice, and many times we fell and saw stars as we banged our heads on the ice. We must have been a tough lot to survive. Summers, when chores were finished, we could play in sloughs or look for Indian circles and pretty rocks. Shorty and I knew where all the birds' nests were for miles around. Have you ever seen the wonder of a wild duck nest covered with the softest down, or meadowlark's nest in tall grass with a false entry? These were our lessons from the great teacher, nature. We ate rose petals and weeds in summer, in fall the rose hips, not even knowing they were a great source of vitamin C. We also ate the fruit of wild cactus. Before so much land was plowed up, the countryside was covered with wildflowers of all descriptions. We knew very few of their names, but we named them ourselves, or Mother did. Back of the house were underground springs, so it was swampy most of the summer. It was lush with violets, the biggest I've ever seen. Thousands of shooting stars and wild roses. Oh, the sweet sense of wild roses. We filled a bottle with rose petals, hung it in the sun, and soon the heat distilled the oil. This was our natural perfume. The first spring flowers were the crocus, which covered the prairie hills in a lavender mantle. Sweet-smelling wallflowers wafted their scent all over. Buttercups were a solid mantle in low, moist spots. Tiger lilies bloomed in July everywhere in the tall grass, like a tapestry of orange, black, and green. Trees were scarce, but a few farmers did start groves. Later, Dad started a grove too. The deer now use it for winter shelter. One year, Mom threw out chokecherry pits, and a few trees sprang up. Like the Druids, we worshipped these or any other tree. Even the lowly buckbrush which a sister used as a Christmas tree once. Working on the land. Spring plowing and sod breaking were a weary, tiresome, cold job for men and beasts. Even 10-year-olds had to pitch in. I milked cows before I started school at age 5 or 6. No wonder I still have a milker's handshake. Wide, rough hands, a good squeeze. My brothers worked like grown men when they were very young. Some were hired out as 10-year-olds to neighbors for very little pay. 2 sisters worked as helpers at 10. Just about the time we had a few cows, horses, calves to get a better start, Dad took sick and went for a stay at the asylum. It was a sad day. Mother had an auction and sold everything but 2 horses and a couple of cows. How we existed, I don't know, but we did somehow. Mother never let us know we were poor, and we never felt it, as she always had good wholesome food on the table, cookies and kuchen. It saddened her, though, to see her daughters and sons hired out so young to neighbors through no fault of her own. Mostly she was cheerful and fun. Evenings we sat around the stove while she told us funny German stories or folk tales. She would dance around the kitchen with a broom or rolling pin in hand. Poor? No, we were rich, having her for our mother. The little cottage was always bright and cheerful, with well-darned white lace curtains, flowery wallpaper, orange-painted floor, and bright crochet ragweed scattered around. Beds had big square pillows with stiffly starched shams embroidered in turkey red on the white bedspread. No one dared sit on beds as they were for sleeping, not lounging. Who can feel poor in such cheerful surroundings? China Closet held our few treasures, a bright red gold Russian tea box, my 5-cent cotton Easter bunny with a carrot, other toys, a few pretty dishes. We kept our few precious toys for years safely in this sacred place, just to look at them. Mom used to make our dolls out of long black stockings, shoe-button eyes, and embroidered nose with skirts and blouses. Nothing went to waste. Flour sacks were bleached in lime and made into bedding, sheets, dish towels. Some dyed black or pink for our bloomers or petticoats with crocheted edges. Good thing we used so much flour, or the Schatz family would have been running around the prairie with bare bottoms. Salt used to come in a small cloth sack. These were hemmed and made into hankies. Sugar came in 100-pound gunny sacks lined with a thin muslin sack. This was a milk strainer. Gunny sacks made pretty rugs or pillows with scraps of bright cloth sewn on. People now think recycling is new. Ha! With us, it was a way of life, or we'd have to wear fig leaves. But no fig leaves available. Come to think of it, maybe beet leaves would do. Threshing time. Fall was the busy season of storing food for winter's hungry family and animals. Grain had to be cut with a binder, then shucks stacked just so. How I detested this, but Dad's law was no work, no eat, so pitch in we did. Later years we used a header, cut grain would flow into the header box, then stacked in the field for the steam thresher. It was difficult to drive the team and kept the header box even so the grain could flow in. I was glad to be fired off the job and be allowed to stay home to help Mom cook. Get ready, threshers will be at your house next week. These were exciting days. More heavy, long hours of work, but a new spirit enters the air, especially if crops were good and the weather dry. Neighbors helped each other and hired a few migrant workers from Kansas or Nebraska who followed the crops north. The big girls loved this. Loaves and loaves of bread were baked, cakes, pies, cookies, and kuchen, as these hungry men were fed 5 times a day. 3 heavy meals, a mid-morn and afternoon lunch with coffee, were hauled out to the field. Woe to us if for some reason lunch was late, as they grumbled as hard as they worked. Out of bed at 4 a.m. to get a huge breakfast ready, the table was set the night before to save time. Spuds, meat, eggs, even cake for these young men were so hungry. Soon we heard the steam engine's loud whistling signals. So early in the cold morning, off they'd go. We fed from 18 to 20 people, neighbors, cousins, aunts, welcome too. While we younger ones milked, Ma started a new meal called dinner. Soup, pickles, meat, spuds, gravy, jams, desserts, all homemade goodies. Mom was a super cook, and the southern men loved to eat her food. They slept in the granary or hayloft. On rainy days, when they couldn't work, we still had to feed them. It was like having Sunday company. Evenings, it was a pleasure to hear the harmonica music in the quiet, lonesome dusk. The joy of seeing the golden grain flowing from the elevator into wagons was heartwarming, as it meant warm clothes for winter and paying year-end debts. They were a proud lot and self-sufficient. Grain was hauled to the Pickardville elevator. Surplus cattle rounded up in the fall and driven to Pickersville to be loaded on trains, then shipped to Minneapolis. How many sacks of grain or cattle to clothe and buy shoes, etc. for 10 people? Miscellaneous stories. Dad took long walks, but one day he decided to ride the horse to our country store at Alta, about 2 miles away. Some hours later, he came tramping home on foot. We asked, "What happened to your horse?" He was so used to walking, he'd forgotten he went on horseback. My brother had to walk down and bring the horse back while Dad laughed at himself. He had a good sense of humor. The store was a favorite meeting place on Saturday night for young men. The owner loved to play checkers. So many hours were whiled away. It also had a post office. Once a week, we took our cream and surplus eggs down and bought whatever we didn't raise, sugar, flour, coffee, etc. When the young men needed a baseball field, the store owner let them use his pasture. It also brought business to the store. During Prohibition, an older brother used to buy rot gut whiskey. We knew he had it hidden, but Mother and I searched all over the place and couldn't find it. We had our wooden washing machine outside under the eaves to catch rainwater. There, floating, was Brother's whiskey. Ma took a snort, then I took one. All the while, Mom giggled because we found it. Of course, Mother only took a snort for medicinal reasons. A Baptist didn't drink, after all. Nor smoke. Dad would ask for some too, then he'd sputter and spit, saying, pure poison, bad stuff, Then hold out his glass, saying, "Give me another one." Stuttering, muttering, pure poison. How it used to amuse us, trying to make us believe he didn't like it. Oh, great day. Brothers Ed and Hank bought a brand new Model T Ford out of their threshing work money. This completely changed our way of life. Now trips to town only took hours instead of a day. Going to church, visiting relatives 30 or more miles away in one day instead of staying overnight or a couple of days. It did take some of the pleasure away, as I enjoyed going to Turtle Lake on the train to Grandpa's house. How excited we were with the beautiful Ford. No car since has seemed so princely. In mud, snow, or ice, it took us to our destination. If we had to push it uphill or out of ruts, what the matter? We were young and full of vinegar. Now Saturday evenings were no longer spent quietly playing checkers at the country store or visiting a neighbor. Instead, the older ones loaded up the car with our friends or cousins and went miles to Pickersville, square dances or barn dances. Much to Mother's dismay, I went too. If brothers could go, why not me? It was wonderful fun, even if we had to push the car out of snowbanks. Mother's anger hurt, but being in my teens, I had a mind of my own. She was very much against dancing, as were her parents. She told us later of her and her sisters sneaking out of a bedroom window when Grandpa was asleep and going to dances when they lived in Russia. How we laughed when Dad was riding in the car with the boys while the boys drove. Being used to horses, he'd say, "Whoa," or "Get up," "Gee," and "Ha." It must have seemed very fast to him, too. He never learned to drive, but sat proudly in the back, whoaing and get-apping. I learned to drive, too, by myself over bumps and rocks till I was used to a steering thing instead of horses. We whittled rug crochet hooks out of wood. What colorful rugs we made. Ma dyed old clothes, sheets, etc. with leftover Easter egg dye. These were torn into long strips, sewed together and made into scatter rugs. To this day, I like them and still make some. My older sister tatted baby boots, caps, and lace, so she taught me too. At age 5 or 6, I made yards of lace for hankies, baby dresses, or petticoats. Our neighbors introduced us to a mail-order catalog, J. Lynn and Company, address 48 Bond Street, New York, New York. How strange to still remember that address after 60 years. This was a new magic world of jewelry, beads, brooches, and bracelets. For a nickel, dime, or pennies, we would send for rings and other trinkets. No monarch was more pleased with his diamonds than we were with these glass baubles. What happened to this company? Little do they know how much happiness their glass jewelry gave these prairie kids. Dad thought it was a sinful pride to wear trinkets to church. So one Sunday I was wearing a 10-cent celluloid fake watch. He, in a loud whisper, ordered me to take it off. We read winter evenings, played dominoes, lotto, old maid cards, etc. When it was too cold to go play outside, also painted with watercolors or used crayons, or else we invented our own games. With 8 of us, we couldn't be lonesome. In our teens, Dad took us to Brush Lake by horse and buggy. Brush Lake was being developed as a resort with cabins, public beach, and a pavilion. How surprised and pleased when Dad gave each of us 50 cents, or one time a silver dollar. Needless to say, I spent 50 cents of that and saved the other half for later on. No $100 bill ever looked bigger. We went swimming or used a dime for a boat ride on the lake. That was a day to remember. Poor Mom stayed home, did the clothes, did the chores, and milked. Later, I realized how she enjoyed a quiet day by herself for a change. When she got on the horse to round up the milk cows, she said the poor horse groaned and grunted every step she took, as Ma had gained weight by this time. Storms, lightning, bang, crash, skies lit up all around us with lightning, then the loud rumble of thunder as though the very heavens ripped apart. How frightening it was. Chickens had to be chased into shelter in a hurry as rains and hail could kill them. In 5 minutes, a beautiful field of grain would be knocked flat, and the year's income wiped out. Year after year, Dad struggled, plowed, seeded, cut hay, hours-long, hard hours. How anyone had courage to do it all over again, year after year, I'll never understand. But they were not defeated. Next spring, farmers hopefully again planted crops. I can still hear Dad when rains came saying, "Coming rain, coming more rain, a good crop, yeah." When it lightened and thundered away at night, I, being a coward, pulled quilts over my head. Not Dad. He went outside excited as though he were part of the elements, muttering his, "Oh, good crop, coming more rain." How they loved the soil and often hated and feared it, but life went on, year after year, with its struggle for existence. Severe winter blizzard, we couldn't go out even a few steps to the back house, where you could get lost and freeze to death. Only the older men could shovel a path through drifts as big as a house to the barn to feed and water animals. Some blizzards lasted 3 or more days. The house got so cold, the nails in the ceiling were white with frost. If water spilled on the floor, it immediately froze. Pots under beds froze solid too. Some winter nights, the snow would seep in cracks in the wall, and you'd find snow on your snug bed by morning. One nice thing about the sod houses, they were warm in the winter, cool in the summer. Our wood frame house was cold, cold, cold. Frost left beautiful patterns on windows. It was always a source of wonder to us. Jack Frost, the artist, had a delicate hand. We heated thimbles and printed our own patterns on windows, as we couldn't go out to play. What a beautiful white snowy world we beheld when storms ceased. Out came sleds and we'd slide down the haystacks or hills, or dig tunnels in snow and build forts. When you're out in a swirling white blizzard, it's an eerie, weird feeling of being nowhere, of nothingness, no time or space. You can't see for the stinging, bullet-like, icy particles. You seem lost in white, suspended space. We were lucky we survived, but many froze to death. One year we found our turkeys had roosted on top of the barn and were frozen stiff. Winter moonlit nights, you could see the jackrabbits play and leap like children in the snow. Many times we counted 20 or more. It was a sight we could never forget. The sky was spectacular at sunset. We saw the sun and 2 or more sundogs. It was eerie but beautiful. How I longed to see this, also the Milky Way and Northern Lights. I liked winter much better than summer in spite of the cold. How beautiful to play out in the snow and ice on a bright moonlight night. It was awesome light, almost like day. Exciting to watch the northern lights playing in the sky, shifting like fingers, one minute, then like a vast curtain in the next. You could almost hear them crackle on the very cold nights. Sometimes they appeared like a glowing curtain drawn across the northern sky by invisible hands. The spectacular display of nature is beyond description. After a long winter, we eagerly awaited the spring thaw. It was a thrill to see a few stalks of grass peeping out again. Being born on the prairie, we could feel the pulse of spring's awakening from its long slumber. Walking home from school, we heard the rhythmic music of water melting under snow as it flows into lakes and ravines, gently murmuring of long, warm days to come. I still miss the 4 distinct seasons of my childhood: the acrid smell of grass under thawing snow, bird and animal tracks in winter telling of their ceaseless struggle for food and existence. I miss the awesome beauty of sunrise winter mornings as it shines on snowbanks, glittering like millions of tiny stars. Hoar frost on wire fences, shrubs, weeds, were strings of sparkling diamonds as far as the eye could see. Not a breath of air stirring, a white, silent, beautiful, icy world. I then felt as though I were the only human being in the whole world, not another person in sight, only chimney smoke off in the distant horizon to tell me more people were there in my world. How strange now, I'm old, to again recall these feelings. How remote it seems. Chances are I shall never experience the same feelings as my winter on the prairie. Time rushes on, our family has dwindled down, but my memories live on. That's it.
That's interesting. That's a very keen description of the life that they led way back then, and she had a very nice way of expressing that. You could sit here for another hour and listen to the way she describes her life.
Yeah,
that's outstanding.
I had a lot more. Once I started timing myself, it's like, oh, this is taking too long, so I had to whittle it down. So yeah, I'm so happy. When? It's not dated. There are some things that have dates, but it's between the 1970s and 1990s. Because sometimes you say, 60 years ago. Sometimes she put, that their ages are 77 to 92, so that would have been the 90s. So 70s to 90s is when she wrote it. And, I'm so grateful she did, because otherwise I wouldn't know,
Sure.
So, and she also did a lot of recipes from memory, and so those are written out.
Yeah.
And then my grandmother, at times when she would go back to visit the farm, would record her siblings talking. And those are kind of hard to listen to because it's so much sound, but I think my mom dictated, transcribed some of those. So it's very, wonderful to do. And I know everybody says, oh, my life isn't interesting, to other people. But really, everybody should be writing some of this down. I asked my mom to do that, and she did, about her life on their Clatskanie farm in Oregon. And then I said, well, it'd be nice to hear your voice. So she then recorded what she had written. So that you have the voice, you have what they wrote. Because, once they're gone, it's gone. So I highly recommend people do that.